These are the Allegheny Mountains in the eastern United States. And one of their characteristics is that they lie in between New York and Chicago. If you could travel from Chicago to New York at the speed of light, it would take 3.9 milliseconds. But it actually takes information much more time to make that journey. So until a few years ago, going down the traditional cabling, it took 14.5 milliseconds. In 2010, fiber optic cables were laid down the same route, and that brought the journey time for information between the two financial centers down to 13.1 milliseconds. At the moment, a company called Spread Networks is in the middle of spending around $300 million to build a new tunnel through the mountains that will take 2.8 milliseconds off the journey time for information from the Chicago exchanges to the New York exchanges. There are people building microwave towers that might bring the time down to 9 milliseconds. There's talk of drones carrying information, flying permanently above the eastern part of the country. So another company is spending $300 million to put a cable under the Atlantic Ocean to shave 0.006 of a second off the time for that information flow. This, of course, is high-frequency trading, trading between computers on computerized exchanges. And this kind of trading now takes about 2/3 of the financial trading on the New York and London stock exchanges. Came down a bit after the financial crisis, and it's rising again. And so in the data centers outside New York and New Jersey, in towns like Carteret in New Jersey, there are cages of servers. The exchanges servers sit in one cage, and trading servers sit in other cages. And the ones closer to the exchanges servers have fiber optic cable looped around to equalize the distance that the information has to travel, because the importance of speed, the financial advantage of speed, is such that even the tiniest fraction of time makes a difference to potential profit. Some of you will have heard of the flash crash that happened on the 6th of May 2010, when there was a big drop in share prices in the United States that reversed itself all within 20 minutes. And researchers looking at very high-frequency data have found out that actually it wasn't that unusual an event. There are lots of flash crashes. They just happen too fast for us to notice them. So this is the world of high-frequency trading. And the financial system shapes the economic landscape. This is one of the pictures by the artist Michael Najjar, who uses stock price indices to create mountain landscapes. But I mean it literally, not metaphorically. Finance literally shapes the economic landscape, because the purpose of the financial system is to take individual savings and pool them and invest them in projects that will deliver a return over long periods of time. I've been working since the mid-late 1980s, and I'll probably work for another 10 to 20 years, and I've got a pension of a kind. Most of you will have as well. And we're talking about periods of decades over which we want those savings to give us a return. Pension funds are very important investors in all the stock markets, and you would expect them to be long-term investors because they've got to take individuals' money and pay them back over decades. But if you look at their behavior, it shows that their time horizon for investing is actually less than a year. And for the financial markets as a whole, when you average together the pension funds and the computers, the average investment horizon is less than 3 months. Research at the Bank of England shows that investors on the UK and US stock markets put a value on anything that's more than 25 years away of 0. They don't care about anything that's further into the future than 25 years at all. And their interest in the future drops off sharply after the first year. Anybody who talks to businessmen a lot will know that when they are assessing investment projects, they're looking for a payback in a year or two. Very few businesses think in periods of even 5 years, never mind 10 or 20 years when they're making investments. And anyway, investment by business in this country this year is the lowest it's been since 1998. Short-termism has been increasing since the mid-1990s, even as the information and communication technologies have spread, become absolutely pervasive in financial markets, and taken over this job of the financial system of turning today's money into investments that will deliver us returns tomorrow. or rather 25 years in the future. This is a huge contrast with the Victorian era, when there was a similar period of huge technical change. Everybody talked about things speeding up. Electricity, steam were coming along. It was all very exciting. Everybody felt unsettled. There were huge social problems, the inequality, the horrors of the Victorian cities. At that time, the Victorians were investing like, well, I was going to say like there was no tomorrow, but they were investing like there was another century ahead of them. I used to show a picture of one of the great town halls of the north that the Victorians built. And in fact, we have the Foreign Office as such a splendid building because Whitehall decided it couldn't be outshone by Leeds town halls. They had to have something at least as good. But I thought, actually, a better measure of how much the Victorians invested was that they invested in Carnegie and Passmore Edwards libraries. They invested in housing. They invested in railways. They invested in the sewerage system. They invested in schools. The physical fabric of our country was still largely the legacy of the Victorian investors. And they made social investments too. They invested in mutual societies, the insurance funds and the building societies that brought financial security to the new industrial working classes. They invested in all kinds of educational societies, some of which are still flourishing today. They invested in political structures and unions. All of these things were the investments that the Victorians made in the long-term future. And what a contrast with us. I mean, of course, we do some investments. Here's the new Central Library in Birmingham. We delivered the Olympics, we invested in that, and we're investing in Crossrail at the moment. So it's not that there's no investment, but the scale of it is completely different. And what we do is all icing and no cake. We're not investing for the future. And there's this incredible paradox that because of the technologies, we talk about the future a lot and we're excited about it, but our behavior shows that we absolutely don't care. We don't care about it. So I want to ask, what can we do about that? And being an economist, and boring, as many economists are, part of my answer is about statistics, which I find very exciting, actually, because that determines your mental universe. The measurements we have of the economy shape how we think about it and what kind of policies and behavior people have. There's a lot of talk about measurement. It has become quite fashionable to say GDP is rubbish, let's measure happiness instead. And I think this is a complete sideshow because there's no information that you get from measuring happiness that you don't already get from measuring GDP. The studies of happiness show that people are happier if they've got a job, but they don't like commuting. They like best having sex and talking to their friends when they go out of an evening, and they love their children, but they find them a bit of a pain in the neck. There's not much policy implication to get out of those kinds of studies. And measures of happiness actually do go up with GDP in the way that height and longevity go up with GDP as well. So I'm not interested in measuring happiness, but I am interested in another flaw in GDP, which is the main measure of the economy and guides what we do. And that is that it bundles together different time frames. It adds together consumption, what we spend on ourselves today, and investment, which we're spending on ourselves in the future. And it doesn't matter for GDP what the ratio of those is. So I think what we need to do is start measuring investment more carefully, and in particular, the change in all the different kinds of assets that matter for the economy. So not just the financial assets, and not even just the physical infrastructure and the housing stock and all of those kinds of assets, but natural assets as well, the stock of oil left in the North Sea, the cleanliness of the air, all of those natural capital measures, and also human capital measures. How skilled is the population? How healthy is the population? And there is work underway. In fact, there's a really good historical precedent for this, and it's the Doomsday Book, which actually measured pretty much every asset in the country. So here we find that Bertrand de Verdun had quite a decent holding there, and of course it recorded the whole lot. We need to measure all of our assets and how they're changing, and it's a big job. The World Bank has started doing this. They call it comprehensive wealth, and it's a really complicated job, as you can imagine, because a lot of these things don't have market prices, so you can't easily use prices to measure how valuable they are. We don't know how to compare them all. So if you collect all the detailed information, what does it mean to say, well, the quality of the air has improved, but there's more CO2 emissions, and this bit of water quality is better, but this bit of water quality is worse. So it's not just actually collecting the measurements, which is a big job, but also understanding how to have a theory about what to do with those measurements in the way that we do with GDP. If you know that GDP grows by 0.2% this quarter, and economists will disagree, but at least they have some theories about what the implications of that are. So we need to start measuring much more carefully assets of all kinds, how they change, and what that means. And that journey by statisticians and economists is only just beginning, but is really important. So measuring is one of the things that we need to do. The other thing that we need to do is talk about institutions, because that's another way of introducing longevity into the economy. Institutions are people coming together and doing things that will last for a certain length of time beyond their own time horizon. Institutions have become a really hot topic in economics. The Nobel Prize went to a couple of institution economists, one of them Elinor Ostrom, a couple of years ago. And it's partly become a hot topic because there have been a lot of protests about the system, a sense that because of the financial crisis, the system, capitalism, is not working well, understandably so. This isn't my picture. I happened to be in Istanbul during the Taksim Square protests. There have been a lot of these protests, and there is definitely a generational aspect to them. Half the Turkish population is under 30. Brazil, where there are protests, is another country with a very young population. So there's a generational aspect to it, and young people saying the system is not working well for me. But actually, I talk to a lot of people in business, chief executives, chairmen of major companies, who say the system's not working well for them either. They know what they're doing is wrong. They just don't know how to get out of it. They'll hire people who are different and then find that they can't use them because they don't conform to the system that's there already. So there is a sense, a widespread sense, I think, that things need to change. The trouble with protest is that actually it leaves the initiative with the system. Everything you do as a protester is defined by that system that you're protesting against. So what we need to do is think in different ways about institutions and institutional innovation, just as the Victorians thought about forming mutual societies and trade unions. What do we need to think about now? And there are actually lots of examples of institutional innovation around. So here's one that a lot of you will recognize. It's the UCL map of where the buses were during the bus strike. And you can see very clearly they were in central London, and East London was a desert for buses during the strike. So that's useful. There are lots of others. There's an app that allows you to report ash dieback if you see a tree that's got the disease. You can report potholes to your local council. You can see what your MP's been up to. So there are lots of these. Other kinds as well. There are a lot of technology-mediated new currencies, local currencies and electronic currencies starting up, which might prove to be very important and exciting. But the technology isn't enough. We're not going to overcome the short-termism driven by one kind of technology just by relying on using that technology in other ways. And I think institutional innovation, to give us that longer time horizon and make us demonstrate our care for the future, is going to require a much greater ambition of purpose. What people have to have in mind is that this is something that will last for 100 years, and that will do something like counteract the imbalance of power and information in the labour market in this zero-contract economy that we have. What kind of assistance do individual workers need? What kind of technology would help them? And that involves coalition building. It involves actually a lot of hard work and old-fashioned campaigning and coordinating with other people. And we all have our own domains for that. Mine, being economics, is about the nature of the subject and the way that it's taught. About 18 months ago, when there had been no reaction at all in universities to the financial crisis, and students who I go and talk to said it wasn't even being mentioned in their economics courses. It was obvious that the economics curriculum and the way it's taught really needed to change. And actually, it had really needed to change before. There was a chasm between the kind of interesting work that economists are doing, the behavioral work, the urban economics, the work on institutions, and what's taught in undergraduate degrees, which is actively false. Undergraduates are taught that individuals make their choices in a rational way to maximize their utility, uninfluenced by other people. And we know that's factually incorrect. And I think it's the only subject that will teach people factually incorrect things in the textbooks. So that had to change, and it started with a conference. And now it's a whole movement of people, partly funded by George Soros money, developing a new curriculum, replacing textbooks, looking at the standards set for universities, working with university departments. But in a year or so, the undergraduate degree could have changed. And 3 years after that, the people who are going out and working as an economist will have a very different way of thinking, and not at all the kind that characterized the thinking before the financial crisis that brought that about. So that's my example, and it's taken a lot of time. And it uses technology. We have a website, and we're developing materials that will be open source for people to use. So I want to leave you with a question. It's been a great 2 days here at Futurefest. And my question is, what institution are you going to go away and build that will take up your time? So don't go and click on anything. Go and think about what are the big problems, and what will you do tomorrow that will make a difference 100 years from now, just as the Victorians did. Thank you.